is an interview of Jack Rittenberg on November 15th at 10 a.m. in the office of B320. And I'm Carol Pohl. I teach sociology here at FIT, and it's part of the 50th anniversary oral history project. Okay, if you would start just telling me your name and your last position and kind of work back about your earliest position.
Sure. Jack Rittenberg. I'm now Dean Emeritus of Business and Technology. I retired, so-called retired, from the college October 1st, 1992. And at that time, I was the Dean for Student Affairs. I'd been the Dean for Student Affairs for 6 years. Before that, I had been the Dean for Business and Technology. That was 15 years. That goes back to 1971. At that time, I was appointed an Associate Dean, a one-year appointment, by Shirley Goodman. We were waiting for Marvin Feldman to come on stream as the new president. That one-year appointment lasted, along with several others who were also appointed deans for many years, mine for 15. And then I just kind of switched horses. Before being named Dean of Business and Technology, I was in the FBM department full-time. I had been an acting chairperson, an assistant chairperson, a kind of co-assistant chairperson with Newt Godnick. We kind of shared responsibilities. And before that, a teacher. I joined FIT full-time February 1st, 1965. I had taught here part-time for a year and a half before. In the 6 years from 65 until 71, when I became the then title of Associate Dean of Business, I had been teaching. I had also been the assistant director of summer sessions, gotten involved in the college in general because I loved it. It became a way of life, and it still is to me, frankly. In the years that I was Dean of Business, the division grew rather extensively. We added the baccalaureate program, which was new. It was a dream in the eyes of many, many people. Our former president, Marv Feldman, mounted a campaign in Albany, and a lot of things were pushed through. The Bachelor of Science in Marketing went through. I don't remember the exact date, but I believe it was 1975 when we started. And Marvin called me in March and said, "We've got approval, go with it. I want a class in September." And I just sat there on with the telephone in my hand, dumbfounded. How do I get a group of students together? But we did. The terms at that time, coming out of Albany, were that we should have no more than one section in each of our upper division programs. The following year, that was 75, 76, and 76, 77, we had two sections. And Marvin said to me, "Don't tell me how you did it. I don't want to know. Just continue." We also started the program in continuing ed at that time. And the marketing program has since, over the years, moved into a very different thrust in terms of some very, very exciting and interesting areas in cosmetic, fragrance, and toiletries, home furnishings, marketing communications, international trade. It started off basically as marketing, fashion-related industries, period, with a couple of thrusts in advertising and in home furnishings, but it grew into the big major that it is today. At the time that I became Dean of Business and Technology, we had just split off the Advertising Communications Department, which had been part of the Fashion Buying Merchandising Department. Going back a bit, when I joined the college, Advertising Communications was just a group of electives that students could take in the merchandising department. And as the need grew in industry, as the desire on the part of students grew, we developed it. That was Arthur Winters who was in the vanguard of that. And that split off, as I remember correctly, in 1970 as a full major, 69 or 70. And it continued to grow and then further developed with a one-year program and then into the upper division. We also developed, in the period of time that I was Dean of Business, a menswear design and marketing major, which is now part of the art and design division, which is where it should be. One might ask, why did a kind of a design major end up in business and technology? Well, frankly, at the time, nobody seemed interested in it except me. And I kind of plowed in with it. I wasn't quite sure what I was doing because my own industry background was all in women's wear. But I made some stops in industry and met people. And with the help of a couple of people here on staff, mostly Ted Roberts, we developed a menswear major. And it is still in existence today, very successful, with some very solid people out there in industry who've graduated from the program, and I'm very proud of that. For a period of time, I did double duty. I was sort of deaning it on the one hand, and I was also chairman of menswear until we began to think in terms of developing it further. We also developed the cosmetic fragrance toiletries major at that time. That started as a 2-year major on the AAS level. And I wrote a lovely lady in, Hazel Bishop, a lady that I didn't know really existed. I thought it was just a name in industry. And I met this lovely lady at a dinner dance and said, "Are you really Hazel Bishop? Do you mean there is a Hazel Bishop?" And she said, "Yes." I brought her down here, and she liked the idea of starting a major. And she became a consultant to the college and helped bring in a considerable amount of money, helped develop the major, introduced a number of other people to me and to the college, like Annette Green, who is today a very strong advocate of the college and the major. And when that was starting, that was another one in which I was deaning it on the one hand and chairing it on the other hand.
Is Annette Green in the fragrance industry?
Annette Green is the executive director. Actually, I think she's the president now of the Fragrance Foundation, which is an arm of the industry, and she has been very strongly in support of the program here. There is a laboratory in her name, the 9th floor. There's a scholarship in her name that's been established. She works hand in glove with the current coordinator of the program, Peg Smith. And now, of course, cosmetic program is on the upper division. It is a part of the marketing thrust. It is one of the several tails, if you will, or subcultures within marketing itself. And it's kept small because the industry will absorb the students, but it's not gigantic. They keep it around 20, 25 kids. But Annette was very strong that way. In the course of time, the college grew. I came here, we were one building, the C building. Classes ended at 4 o'clock. Started at 9, ended at 4. We had a 2-hour common hour in the middle of the day on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And even before that, if you wanted to have club meetings, it was generally at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We had no problems. We were really a commuter college. We had one dormitory, Nagler Hall, which is still non-air conditioned. I'm not sure. I think they tend to put all freshmen in there. They don't know better at that point. And within a couple of years, we were conducting classes in temporary buildings that were located behind the C building in what was then a courtyard, located where the co-ed dorm is now, which had been a parking lot for some of our colleagues to put their cars. That disappeared because we needed the space, and we had temporary buildings in there. And this was a delight to teach because when it rained, you heard the pitter-patter of little raindrops constantly on metal roofs, and you would just kind of like sit and wait until it was a quiet moment so that you could continue talking. But it was fun.
Both these like temporary Quonset huts or something?
Well, yeah, they were a little bit nicer than Quonset huts. You walked up a couple of stairs and walked in, and there was a building. And you sat down, and hopefully you could teach. They were air-conditioned, so that was fun, because the C building at that time was not air-conditioned. So people used to vie for classes in these temporary buildings. When we had summer classes, the basement had a snack bar where the clothing lab is now, and that was air-conditioned. So we used to divide that up into 4 areas, and then we could have classrooms there. So people would again vie for that morning, noon, and night. because it was rather noisy, they put up temporary walls which were about 1 foot from the ground and 1 foot from the ceiling. So depending upon who was teaching in the next little quarter, you sometimes had a conflict of voices. And pity the poor students who weren't quite sure who they were listening to. But we managed. The college was growing. I think we were about 1,200 students. I don't really know the exact number of students at the time. When I came here in '65, the college had already made plans to embark on a 10-year building program. I was not part of that. That had started just before I came here. And we just grew. And suddenly, we then began to get the approval for building, and what started out as, I don't know how much, perhaps $30 million building program ended up being close to $100 million or in excess of $100 million. And the buildings started to go up. And we had our problems with the buildings going up. Doors that opened into nothing. A mistake here and there. I guess this happens in all kinds of things. Once there was a whole load of I-beams and other kinds of beams delivered from Pennsylvania that turned out to be all the wrong size. So they had to go back, and we had to start all over again with some other plan. But the buildings progressed. And we slowly but surely opened all of the new buildings.
What was on the block before the buildings went in?
There were just some old buildings, like across the street at 236, and the buildings across the street, they were, I guess it's called part of eminent domain, and they were brought down and condemned, or whatever the term is. I hate the word condemn, but we ended up getting the whole block. But there had been just other buildings, not in use. Remember, this whole area at one point had been very strong in the fur market. And back in the 60s, the fur industry began a slide downward. So a lot of buildings just simply were empty. And it was, I guess, easy at that point to get hold of them. And the plans came up at the time to build a second dormitory. That's for the co-ed dorm. That was air-conditioned. And the original plan was the first 10 floors were going to be dormitory space, and the top 5 floors were going to be available to faculty and staff. That never happened, because more and more young men and women coming here wanted to stay in the dorms. So the dorm became a dorm. And then you have the A building, B building, D and E, which were developed, opened, and so on. And I remember once Shirley Goodman taking a group of us on a tour of the new buildings. It was still hard hat. And all we could do was see space and stare. I remember going to the library and staring at that enormous space and then being told it's 3 floors. We had a library originally that I can't even begin to tell you how big. It was nothing. It was, well, if you go into the current library now, just where the magazine section is and the music room, that was about the size of the old library. And to suddenly see this enormous expanse that was going to be 3 floors. And of course, the collection of clothing had begun before that, but it wasn't very much. But suddenly, there was this enormous space. And you looked at it and said, this is ridiculous. What are they doing with this much space for clothing? I didn't know how much clothing they had in rented space around the corner on 26th Street. But then that came in, and what is now the museum at FIT opened, and we had our clothing collection and our fabric collection.
How did this start, the clothing collection? What was it like?
I don't know the exact story, but as I understand it, there was a very, very large clothing collection at the Brooklyn Museum. And post-World War II, people just weren't going over there as often as they should have, to see the history involved in terms of fabrics, in terms of clothing, in terms of colors, and so on and so forth. And when FIT was born, and we were building, we had donations made to us. Someone had the idea, I do not know who, to have a merger, so to speak, of merchandise from the Brooklyn Museum on permanent loan to FIT. So a good number of things came over here. As the college has grown over the years, and again, this is what I have been told, I don't know for sure, and we began to get more and more of our own donations. Slowly but surely, the arrangement with the Brickton Museum was no longer necessary. So they have their costume exhibits and collection, and we have ours, because people have been very kind to us in terms of making donations, and it's an incredible place. I always used to love bringing guests there and showing them around and showing them Chanel collections and so on and so forth. As a former buyer of women's sportswear and fashion goods, it was always an exciting thing to see. And even today, I'm sure it's still with me. I still look at something and say, gee, that was last year's. And my kids look at me and say, Dad, enough. But you can't get rid of it. You just can't. The college, we grew like Topsy. We just grew by leaps and bounds. It was incredible. We didn't know people anymore. You'd go to the dining room and there'd be someone new. You'd stare, where'd he come from? Where'd she come from? You just didn't know anyone anymore. What had been a very comfortable small family, literally, was growing by leaps and bounds. When the new buildings opened, in a peculiar way, I thought it was sad that the cafeteria was located all the way over on 8th Avenue, and people who were in the D building, to get there, you got to go up a flight of stairs, down a flight of stairs, walk here, walk there. There's no straight run to the cafeteria. And people began to use satellites that ARA began to put up, little vending machines here and there, running out across the street for a quick sandwich. Because if you've only got an hour between classes, it became very difficult, seriously, to just run to the cafeteria for a quick bite. And I think that helped kind of, well, not destroy, but sort of knock apart a lot of the camaraderie, a lot of the fun. It's still there. It was still there when I was still here full time. But if you showed up on the cafeteria, the 8th floor at the employees' cafeteria, invariably someone would say, gee, Jack, I thought you forgot about us. I was always too busy to run up there. But as the building grew, and then you began to have sort of pockets, teachers were in the D building, teachers were in the B building, and it sort of never met anymore. They were running back and forth. We grew big in a way too fast, but it was exciting. The students were doing well, and that was the important thing. Our graduates are doing well. The colleges survived some pretty rough things, pretty rough times back in the early 70s, where there was a money crunch, which people are experiencing right now in 1994. But I remember having been named Dean of Business and Technology. Gladys Marcus was named Dean of Liberal Arts, and Charlie Heileman was named Dean of Art and Design. One of the first things we had to do before Marvin even came on stream was to sit among other people to decide how we were going to cut. We didn't even know our own divisions. We didn't even know people at that point, and yet we were forced to make budget cuts right off the beginning. Slowly but surely, things got better, and the college grew. Money was available, equipment was purchased, new faculty was hired, part-time grew. Continuing ed has grown to a point now where, of course, you have Saturday classes, Sunday classes, early birds, which aren't the most popular. But we're sort of like Citibank. We never sleep. We're open all the time here, and we just keep going. And I think that's fun. Students keep coming in. They pick a course here. They pick a course there. I'm kind of rambling. Please forgive me. But I've always tried, even when I was an administrator, to teach a course at night, because I like to keep my finger on the pulse of things. And the excitement, the interaction between students who are out there working and with somebody here at the college, to me, was very important. I still teach now part-time, only in the spring. That's my choice. I like to have the rest of the year off to spend with my grandchildren. But
What do you teach?
I teach in the merchandising department. I teach retail math, what's called retail math. It's really merchandise planning and control, a euphemism for retail math, so the kids don't get frightened until they walk into the class and realize that it's numbers. I also teach merchandising techniques. I've taught a workshop in fashion planning, fashion buying and merchandising, rather. I try and keep my schedule for personal reasons, a very tight one when I teach, so that I have the opportunity to go down to Florida occasionally to see my children down there and to visit other people. And I like to be free from June 1st on, and I spend the rest of the year doing what I want to do. And it's wonderful. I don't know how I ever had time to come to work, frankly. But I'm having a wonderful time. And I'm still here. I still do seminars. And I find doing seminars exciting because I'm in touch with people in industry who are living with every single nuance that's current. And I'm learning from them. They're learning from me what they want.
What do you mean by seminars, for example?
Seminars through the seminar department, little... what else do I call them other than seminars?
What's the topic, for instance?
Well, I don't even know the topic of the one I'm doing now, I'm ashamed to say, but it has to do with retail math, gross margin, Jim Roy, and dollar planning. A very tight 9-hour session aimed at salespeople in industry.
Oh, okay.
So I'm doing that now. I've done similar things.
How does that work, though? You notify the industry, asks you to...
Yes, the seminar department has a whole series of brochures that they send out. They have a long-established mailing list, and of course they're always adding to it. And they send information out. I think these are a series of seminars that we're doing. Are you interested? And some of them are just very basic jewelry design, for example. I think there's one called Bobble's string beading or something like that, which, believe it or not, is very successful. And some are very, very specific for an industry need. We developed, Joan Volpe and I, Joan Volpe is the director of or head of the seminar area. She and I developed this 9-hour segment after it had been played with by someone like Betty Tepper, for example. She had done a few of these for Liz Claiborne. And then we beefed it up into a 24-hour segment, and then have now pulled elements out of it for very specific audiences. So right now I'm doing one to a large group of people, like 2 from this company, 2 from that company, and so on. There are 21 people in the group. But I've also done them on campus, on home ground, at Liz Claiborne, at Coach Leatherware, at Abe Road, and so on and so forth, because they want to do it there. It's easier for them. They just pull all their people together. And it's been fun. And I learn from this because I see the market as it is today. I still go out on the market and visit former students and friends of mine who are in the market just to see what's a new line, what's doing here and there, because I'm interested. But the seminars I find dramatic.
Is that what most people do? How does the faculty keep in touch with the industry?
Many of them have long-standing contacts that they just stay with and keep with, as I have done. I would say in this day and age, most of our faculty keep in touch with students. This has always been a faculty that's been very involved with students, has always felt very strongly about students, and has always kept a very good rapport with students, graduates. And I would say, without knowing for sure, that most of our colleagues can pick up a telephone and call any one of a dozen people who graduated and are in the industry, and who will arrange a field trip for you, who will do any number of things. I've been able to do that. Many of my colleagues here in merchandising have been able to do that. And it's one way to keep with it. I was walking down 7th Avenue the other day, and a young lady stopped me, and after a hug and a kiss, "When are you coming up to my showroom? I'm now the vice president of merchandise." I said, I know, I keep tabs on you. She says, "Yeah, but you haven't come up to see the line." I promise. But I'm no different than anyone else. A lot of people keep in touch with a lot of other people. I am going on a vacation. Being retired is wonderful, by the way. I keep calling it a vacation. I don't know why. But I'm going to be out in Phoenix, Arizona for 3 weeks. And I'm staying with a couple a lady who graduated from FIT in 1967. She met her husband in my class, and they've kept in touch with me all these years. And I'm staying with them for a few weeks. And recently I came back from Florida, in addition to seeing my children. In Orlando, I went down to Miami for a few days and spent time down there with, again, a group of former students who are working down there. One has his own business, and I keep in touch.
Could we talk a little about your background in the industry? You mentioned it.
Yeah,
Before-
I was a buyer, and I had been an assistant merchandise manager at a company called Bond Stores. They're now out of business. They didn't go out of business because I left. It took many years afterwards. But I kind of grew up in that company. I got started many years before working part-time at a department store in New Rochelle, New York, where I was born and raised, which was taken over by Bloomingdale's. And I was offered a job at Bloomingdale's, which I turned down because I wanted to continue college full-time. My parents sat me down and said, look, you're a decent student, but you're not the greatest student, Jack. And if you think you'll really stay with things part-time, we think you're nuts. So we would rather you go to school full-time. And I took their advice, and I'm very happy that I did. When I finished school and I served in the military, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. By the way, my degree, I have a degree in education. I am a bona fide teacher to start with. I just never wanted to teach. I just felt it was wrong. I had a terrible run-in with a couple of cooperative teachers when I was doing student teaching. And decided it wasn't for me. So I ended up in the trade, in the rag business, and loved every single minute of it. Came down here one day with a friend of mine from the industry whose wife taught in the English department. Her name was Lucille Madison. And just to have lunch. At that meeting, I met Jeanette Jarno, who was then the chairman of the fashion buying and merchandising department. She founded that department, this department. And we were chatting away, and Jeanette heard that I was a buyer. I had finished college. I had finished the military, which in those days were all the important things, at least the military out of the way. She said, would you like to teach part-time? And I said, teach what? She says, well, what you're doing, of course, merchandising, buying. I said, wonderful. Next thing I knew, I had an appointment with the head of the coordinator of continuing ed for merchandising, Nate Axelrod, and he said, okay, I got you set for a job on Tuesday nights in the fall. Terrific. I started teaching, and I loved it. I loved teaching what I loved doing. And of course, like all budding teachers, I was teaching everything. Curriculum meant nothing to me. Of course, I've studied because you can't teach this without that. Here I am doing it every day. And I was beginning to make inroads into other courses. One of the students said, but Mr. Rittenberg, we learned that in such and such a class. I said, oh. I backed off, did a little bit of research. No one had told me this before, by the way. I did a little bit of research and decided maybe I better know what other classes the kids are taking or have to take or that are required. And then I stayed with that class, then I added a basic marketing class, and then I added the retail math class, and I added the workshop in fashion buying while I was in continuing ed. And then Jeanette called one day and started to have a conversation with me while I'm at my desk in the office about a job. I said, Jeanette, this is not the time to discuss this, please. I said, I'll meet you in your office. And I went down there, and she offered me...
You were at a different job.
I was at Bond Stores.
Yeah.
And she offered me a job here. And we went down, I went down, we had a long talk about it, and I thought about it and called her back and said, okay. I felt that I could make a change. I'd give myself a year or so, because that would still give me time to get back into the marketplace if I felt I really was not happy. And I was very happy here. I came here at about the same time. Newt Godnick preceded me. Lorana Miller preceded me, I think, each by one semester. That was the beginning of the growth of the FBM department. We were then, I think, 8 full-time people in an office that could really comfortably house maybe 6. My desk was, as you opened the door, was right here. And if the door was closed and anybody opened it, they would bang into my chair. And if a kid would come in and say to the secretary, who was Clara Levinson, I'd like to see Mr. Rittenberg. And she'd be very solemn and say, let me see if he's in. And there I was, of course. You couldn't see everyone. You couldn't miss anyone. But Clara tried to maintain a kind of sense of propriety in the office. But that was my background. I had spent 13 years at part-time work at Wares and Bloomingdale's. And then I joined Bond Stores, and I moved up the ladder at Bond from a clerical assistant to an assistant buyer. That was, I think, in 2 months. And then 6 months later, an associate buyer, and 6 months later, a buyer. And then a couple of years after that...
That was for women's clothes.
That was all in women's clothes. Women's sportswear, neckwear, blouses. At one point, I had some experience for a short time in lingerie. But frankly, that is no place for a man, because the industry just would sort of look at you strangely when you walked into a showroom. There were some males in that field, but I felt I couldn't get very far, so I moved back into sportswear. And I'd had some experience in leatherware, handbags and all, and accessories, and then we split that off for another buyer at some point. And as I said, I became assistant merchandise manager. And then walked into my boss one day and said, I'm leaving. And he stared at me. I said, I've just been offered a job, which I am going to take. Don't even offer me money, because I want to take this job in teaching. And he thought I was nuts. I wasn't too sure. I was married at the time. I had 4 children growing up. It was a big, big change. But I don't regret it. I've never regretted it. It's always been a very positive move on my part. I just moved ahead. When I first came here, I must be honest with you, Jeanette Jarno was a doll. She gave me a very tight schedule. In those days, there was no AOP list, and department heads did everything. With the idea that I could start developing
What do you mean did everything?
They did the scheduling. They worked with the registrar on the scheduling, and they told you what you were going to teach. And Jeanette would very frequently work with the teachers. You've been teaching this for so long, how about trying something else? And try and break you in a little bit. And as I said, she gave me a very tight schedule with the idea that I could develop a consultancy. She knew I was taking a drop in income, and she knew that I had a family. Unfortunately, I made a mistake somewhere along the line. I got involved in administration at the college, so there went the consultancy, but I don't regret that either.
What do you mean consultancy?
Well, I would work in industry for different manufacturers or retailers. They were having a problem, and could I solve it? Perhaps there was a shortage problem, or they wanted to restructure a store, and I'd work with architects and interior designers in terms of a flow. What's the better flow of merchandise? Where do you put this counter and that counter, and so on?
So that was a way to supplement, if somebody
Yes.
had, and was that pretty common?
Oh yeah. I'm sure there are many people on staff today who have consultancies, and I think it's a fantastic thing, because it keeps you that much more aware of what's going on today. It doesn't become strange. You just don't leave and then say, well, I'm going to teach something. I'm going to teach fashion merchandising. You can't teach fashion merchandising if you don't know what's current, if you don't know what's going on. You have to see the stores. You have to know what the changes are. You have to know about the different changes in the way stores operate. And that's, a consultant brings you that. That's one of the reasons I think that having a number of part-timers on staff, I think the college has too many at this point, but there are extenuating circumstances, brings a great deal of excitement to a department, because they're working. And they're only here part-time.
Most of the part-timers work in the industry.
Well, I don't think that's true anymore. I think a good number of part-timers are here full-time. I don't mean to say, basically, in other words, they do very little in industry. Not as much as they could. There are people who are not going to like that statement. But they're good teachers, and that's the important thing. I mean, obviously, everywhere along the line, you've got somebody who's not so good. But then, listen, you find that in every field, in any business, et cetera, and so forth. However, here, my experience over 28 years working full-time at the college has been that the teachers are excited about what they're doing because it's not dead. It's constantly changing. Whether you're teaching design, whether you're teaching display, whether you're teaching merchandising or advertising, it's different today than it was last year, than it was 5 years ago. And you've got to be aware of it. So whether you're working at it or not, you're reading, you see it. There's an excitement there. And the students. Students, we are blessed, I believe, in that kids know what the hell they want when they come here. If you ask a student who's coming here in a major such as interior design, that young man or woman knows the difference between interior decorating and interior design. Otherwise, he or she wouldn't be here. And that's important. That makes our jobs. And I must admit, I'm speaking for those of us more in the, quote, two major areas, art, design, and business and technology, exciting. In a way, I think it makes the liberal arts teachers' jobs a little bit more difficult because the young people come here wondering, why do I have to take a liberal arts course? And many of us are very firm liberal arts, have very firm liberal arts backgrounds and believe in the liberal arts. We're always talking about it, but most of these kids come in and say, I want to be a designer. Why do I need to take so-and-so, so-and-so? They learn pretty well.
But what was the thinking for them taking liberal arts?
Well, originally, going back to the time that the college was founded, in order to be accredited, you had to have 1/3, a minimum of 1/3 of your college credits, college requirements in the liberal arts. The typical program in the college was then 60 credits, not at FIT, but in most colleges. Therefore, 20 credits were liberal arts.
For the associate's degree.
For the associate in applied science. I don't know the requirements for an associate in arts. They're obviously higher in the liberal arts. But the typical program at FIT was always heavier than 60 credits. So they came up with, the original founders came up with 24 credits in the liberal arts. And then, I believe...
Why is that? What was, do you know?
Well, again, 1/3. Because many of our
Yes,
courses were 24 credits, so then 1/3 of 20, I'm sorry, many of our courses were 72 credits. 1/3 of 72 was 24.
Oh.
So we've stayed with the 24 pretty regularly ever since then. The requirements of, pardon me, 2 semesters of English, 1 semester of composition, 1 semester of something else in English, I think are pretty standard throughout the state. The 2 semesters of college science or math are pretty standard throughout the state. FIT was unusual in the development of a history of art course, which was never a history of civilization, but rather the history of art. Taught over the years by some incredible teachers here at FIT. And originally everyone had to have a year of history of art. That changed after a while in the business and tech area to have 1 semester of history of art. Because it was felt necessary that other courses be added in. And you just couldn't keep adding courses without having to take from something else. Because otherwise you'd end up with a program that would be, who knows, 90 credits perhaps or more with regard to a 2-year degree. Well, that's nonsense. In the business area, economics was something that was talked about for a long time. And then the social science area at the time developed an economics course and hired someone to teach economics. And as I recall, the first time around, it was barely able to squeeze out 4 classes. And now, of course, it is required in the upper division in the marketing program and so on and so forth. And then you have macro, micro, and other forms of that. When I first came here, basically everybody took psychology and sociology and a year of history of art. in the business and tech area, when they brought it down to a semester of history of art, it gave the liberal arts people a little bit more opportunity to add some electives. And primarily, unfortunately, it was only the business and tech people, students, who took the liberal arts electives. Because in the art and design area, they were tight. But the idea of psychology and sociology began to spread. It was psychology, sociology, economics, world affairs, government. As we were growing, we were able to offer more to the students. And of course, the couple of semesters of phys ed, health ed, which most colleges offer. In some colleges, by the way, in the state system, believe it or not, the health ed is considered part of the liberal arts requirement, so that if they have 20 credits, it could be 18 credits of liberal arts courses plus 2 credits of health ed. We never felt that way here. We felt health ed should be a separate entity. And I'm one of those people who felt that way at the time.
Could we talk a little about, what you know of the development of FIT, the early days? What we were talking about earlier.
The early days. I'm not quite that old. I'm not quite that old.
I don't say you experienced, but
the
what you've heard about it.
People from industry went to the Board of Education. First of all, the city of New York had for a long time had a philosophy that in education they should have specialized high schools, and they had a high school of aeronautical science and a high school of automotive science and other things like this. So a group of people from industry back in the 30s, I believe, in the early 30s, went to the Board of Education and said, we have a growing business in the city, a major business, the garment industry, and we need help. We desperately need help. Can't you do something? I believe at that time a number of companies banded together and made donations of equipment and so on. And a high school was born. At the time, it was called the Central High School for Needle Trades. In the 50s, the name was changed to the High School of Fashion Industries. It's on 24th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues. As the years went on, back in the 40s, the same people, the same manufacturers, the same industry people who had worked hard and were excited about the establishment of a high school, realized that, fine, they were hiring high school kids, but they needed people with more advanced studies. So they went to their only contacts, the Board of Education, and said, we need more. What can you do for us? Supposedly these conversations went on someplace over a pastrami sandwich. I'm not quite sure about how true that is, but it sort of adds an element of market to what you want to say. FIT was born. It was born originally as 1 year of post-high school. The people occupied the top floor of the High School of Fashion Industries. That was in the mid-40s. And it grew. The original group of students, I believe there were 100 students then, their tuition as such was paid for. Had nothing to worry about. The Board of Education had to supply the teachers. And they did. As time went on, things grew. The number of students grew. And plans were made for a separate school. I don't remember the year, it was 51 or 52. FIT had moved from a 1-year postgraduate program to a 2-year program and became the second unit in the state system as a community college. And in those days, there were no dormitory. Everything was New York. No one thought about students coming from outside the city. The industry itself was, while there were pockets around the country of garment people, New York City was the place. This is it. Everybody came here for their design information, for their production information, et cetera, and so forth. Here, meaning the city. Back in 50, I think it was 52, FIT was set up as the second community college in the state system. Witness, this is our 50th anniversary. We graduated kids in 94, 90, I guess it was 44, 45, 54, 45. Where am I? 44, 45, right. We became accredited and continued to grow. 1959, I'm told there was a march up 8th Avenue into 27th Street to what was then the new building, the C building. And that was the beginning of FIT. They moved in here with FIT as we know it today. There were, I believe, 400 students. It was an academic march. Everybody was very excited about it. And the school was built originally to house, let's say, 1,200 people. There were only 400-odd people moving in. So everything was set now. FIT was going to be here, a strong image. Within 6 years, the whole thing was changed into another 10-year program for more buildings and buildings and buildings and so on, because the college grew and grew and grew.
What were the early students like? Do you what you've heard? Were they mostly women? I can hear.
Mostly women. There were a few men. Most of the men came into one of two majors, apparel production, which was then called Management Engineering Technology. If ever there was a title that would frighten people, that was it, as far as I'm concerned. That was changed to reflect more what it is, apparel production technology. And then students in merchandising. There were always male students in design. And you can't negate a guy like Calvin Klein and a few others who was a student back there, not in the 40s, but in the 50s.
Mostly were first generation.
Mostly were first generation.
First generation college.
Yes, yes.
And in terms of ethnicity, what background were most of the students in?
Oh, I really can't tell you because I don't know. I really don't know. When I joined FIT in '65, from an ethnic background, I would say not most, half the students, a large proportion of the students in merchandising were of Jewish background. And then it began to sort of sprinkle out. In the design area, I don't know. Because I didn't teach design classes, I didn't know the students there. But as time has gone on, this has changed. FIT has never had a large male population. It's always been a bit heavier at night in continuing ed classes than it has been in full-time day. And I think historically, the fashion industry always meant, you saw a picture of a woman as a designer, of a woman as a buyer, and so on and so on, and it took time for people to get into that. I don't know what the population mix is today in terms of male versus female, but I do know, for example, the college has grown to the point where we have a large group, about 10% of the population of the college is foreign students. We have become very well known overseas.
Okay, when you mean foreign students, do you mean international students that come here just to study?
Thank you for the correction. Yes, international students from Japan, Korea, England, South Africa, Israel, Canada, Mexico, Brazil. They're here from all over the world. And many states are represented. I remember a number of years ago, someone did a study. I was dean of students then, and we had something like 38 states represented. Students from one from Alaska. Couldn't figure that one out. I couldn't see what you could do with wolf skin or something as a fashion item, but that was all right. But the college has got a very strong reputation all over the world now, and I think that's wonderful. We now have many more students, of course, coming from outside the state. Hence, the original dorm, then the co-ed dorm, and then alumni hall.
We have students from many different countries that are still immigrant populations.
Yes.
And there's been a tradition of immigrants appears to be coming here as well. I mean, the founders who started the college were immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely.
themselves.
They were all
I think.
immigrants, and frankly, their children didn't want to grow up in the rag business. They wanted to become physicians and attorneys and accountants and I don't know what else. Hence,
They were mostly Jewish coat and suit manufacturers?
most of them at that time, yes. The market has changed over the years to have a wider ethnic background. But originally it started, these people, I guess they were tailors and seamstresses at home on the other side when they first came here, and they did what they were able to do and just moved from there.
Well, with your experiences working with students, and I believe with continuing ed, have you seen this tradition, though, of the garment industry being an immigrant population, using it?
In a way, yes, the immigrant population today is very different. However, there are a large number of people from South America, from Central America, which is, I would say, from the islands, from Puerto Rico, for example, a large Hispanic group of people who are in the industry and doing well and moving ahead. The population base, the grid of the city of New York has changed, and therefore the grid has changed at the college. The college reflects what's going on around us, and there's nothing wrong with that. It makes life exciting, frankly. It also, when this started several years ago, pushed the college into offering foreign languages, which we had never done before, because it was something, not so much for the international point of view, but I had long pressed for the fact that we offer a course in Spanish, because we had so many Spanish-speaking people in the city moving into the industry. When we did, interestingly enough, of course, didn't do so well. Apparently the people who should have spoken Spanish knew how. And then subsequently, we offered Italian and French, now I believe Japanese, as well as Spanish.
You worked with continuing ed.
I was the dean of students, my last job here, but that was, I considered being dean of students, dean of all students, part-time and full-time. But I taught in continuing ed, worked as closely as I could at all times with the dean of continuing education.
Do you see differences between the continuing ed students and the day
Over the
sessions?
years?
Yeah. And
A difference between continuing ed students and day session?
not only in terms of grades, just
I don't know. I never taught that much at night. I taught one class a year, generally a very basic course. And I must admit, I never had the time to prepare some of the electives that I would have loved to have done otherwise, because I just didn't take it. And being a full-time member here and in administration, the kind of students that I dealt with were generally a young man or woman who had a problem, financial, emotional, or otherwise, and I would refer them to places. I'd have to go chasing after kids who were late in payment of their tuition. I had a good understanding of the student body. If I had to make a comparison, I'd say still the people in continuing education are by and large people working in industry right now who want to further their education. They want to pick up ideas here and there. Some of them, many of them don't need a degree. They want specific courses. They want that extra course in textiles or another course in sewing just to refresh themselves. Whereas the kids coming in during the day, full-time student, is here for a college education. And you can forget about how they dress. That's part of life. I must admit, yesterday I was shocked out of my gourd when I saw a girl with spiked hair, and I thought I had seen the last of that down in Sloane Square in England several years ago, but I guess it's coming back. Since my grandchildren aren't quite old enough yet, I don't have to worry about that. Besides, that's my kid's problem, not mine.
Okay, we're drawing to a close. If you think about something you'd like to put in the record, that you'd like to, make sure people remember and know about FIT.
Put in the record. Just remember that FIT has proved itself as a phenomenal institution. The key to this institution are two things. the faculty who come with strong industry experience. They've done it. They didn't learn it from a book and then start teaching it. Don't ever, ever change that. And then your students, continue to bring them in here as a captive audience, the kids who know what they want. Don't baby them. I don't think many people do anyway, frankly, but don't baby them. But teach it the way it is. There are deadlines. The biggest problem I've ever had with students is they don't know what a deadline is. If it's not today, tomorrow's all right. That doesn't work. If you've got an ad that has to be taken care of and it's not in today, you've lost it. Stay with the deadlines. But above all, certainly don't change the requirements for teaching at the college in terms of industry experience and so on. I think that's urgent. I think it's very important. And I'd like somehow, if ever it's possible, to develop, when money is better, a kind of operation that could permit faculty to have a currency in industry, to go back in as, I can't think of the word now, but a kind of an internship by faculty to just be able to perhaps be released from a class one semester and spend a day every single week. I think many faculty do things similar to this on their own, but to just make it part of the job would be exciting. Would force them to really say, I was out there and I saw them do this, and I didn't believe what I saw, but it's exciting and it's different and it's wonderful, and we've got to put that in as part of the course of study.
Could I just ask about one thing that came up on another end?
Sure, ask me for anything, just don't ask the money.
The issue of the female students at the early stages, that there was glass ceilings in certain industries that they couldn't get into, and they were steered into programs, that they couldn't, there were certain, maybe it's not true of merchandising, opportunities for women were always available, but there were some areas that they just wouldn't hire women, and so the women were discouraged from majoring in that. Is that what you remember?
I don't remember that here at all. In my years in the garment industry, I do not remember women being singled out. I think if there was the opportunity to promote a man and a woman, both equal, the man always got the nod. Even in my day, that began to change as I was growing up in the industry. But when I first went in the industry, I saw it in the company that I worked at, Bond Stores, where in another situation there were two people of equal, I considered them certainly equally knowledgeable, and it worked the same length of time. And there was an opening, and the man got it. And the girl was very upset. And the response was, well, he needs the money, he's married. And I just sat there because I happened to overhear this. I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. She up and left and got a job somewhere else at much more money.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Happy anniversary.
Right, it was great. It was interesting. Everybody adds different things. That's what's so interesting.
All right. So
I have to look back and see who said it. I think it was either Al Sloan. That's funny.
Well, Al had a wealth of information.
There were certain, I have to go back to the tape, that they seemed to they dissuaded the girls from certain majors, I think, that they weren't open.
Well, Al came here before I did by several years, and it may have been that was the case. Now, I do know, for example, people going into display many, 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 many years ago, if you were a woman, you weren't going to make it. Why? They didn't think a woman could wield a hammer, because display was not drawing pictures and saying, you do it. You had to do it. And that was a very different reason. Today, you got a phenomenal display and exhibit design department here. At least I think it is. And it's at least half women.
Yeah.
And they will wield a hammer and a sword like anybody else, and there's no reason for it. From that point of view, there were some problems. When I first got started in the industry, as in all industries in 1951, it was difficult for a black person to get ahead.
Yeah, maybe we should put that on the tape.
And that has subsequently changed.
Yeah. Do you want to add about that?
Oh, I don't know.
All right, so.
But the reason I say I don't know is because I don't know how I can, I don't have facts on how I can,
Yeah,
I know
well,
what I lived through.
Yeah, exactly, okay.
And that changed very rapidly, however, because here and there you found someone who was super, and you said, the hell with it, that's all I want. And I've known many, many people, but there was a time when, before my time, my mother used to tell me this, that, because she used to work for a company called Arnold Constable, you had a person of color, a black person, selling on the main floor.
Right.
That was your, what's the word I want? Statement. And that's changed, obviously. But even when I started at Bond Stores, a similar situation happened. She happened to have been a phenomenal woman and worked in my department. And that was great. But after a while, again, that began to change, even when I was in industry.
Yeah, this isn't an expose of the fashion industry in those days.
Oh, no.
So,
No,
I mean,
the whole industry was that way.
I met somebody, I was a graduate of FIT. She's in her, I'd say she's in her 60s now, in her 50s. And I said, I taught at FIT. She says, oh, I graduated. She says, but you have to realize when we graduated at FIT and we went out in the showroom, we were being propositioned like crazy. We had to fight off. They thought that was part of it. How things have changed.
That's right. That's right. It's
just that, this, that's not part of these interviews. That struck me as very interesting. This other world, things you just assumed. Then it was part of everyday pinch rear ends and things that went on.
That was very common. I have a cousin who used to be a model in the brown girdle industry. You have to have quite a body for that. And Helen did and does, and she's 65, 68 years old now. She used to say that she'd come home black and blue constantly, until one day she hauled off and slapped the president of a large retail company. And bluntly said in the showroom, I'm not paid for that, and walked out and threatened to sue them. And this is well before all the currency and things of that nature. And she wasn't fired, got a letter of apology.
This was, the
but
world.
she just, she loves to tell that story. And
well, what you told, it was fascinating how the college grew, and I have to tell Dave Zygot, I have to tell Webb, Booty, and Audrey what the buildings were here, because we discussed this. What were the other buildings here?
Most of them were absolutely...
They couldn't remember what the buildings were.
Well, across the street is a building where we rent space, which is called, I think, the Fur Arts Building. Now, this whole area was the fur industry.
Yeah. And
the Kiel Tower, which is an apartment house across the street, used to be a building of nothing but furriers. Each floor was a complete loft. And the industry has just gone down, down, down.
Did it go? It sounds like it started going down before the whole protect animals movement.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it did?
It started to go down. Furs were very high, and then you came up with fake furs, only they didn't call them fake furs, they called them something else. But
I guess synthetic furs or something.
and some of them looked pretty awful. I mean, they didn't even look like they slept next to an animal. They were so bad. But they, the industry just went down. And then there was a slight resurgence about, 8, 10 years ago. But nothing like what it could have been. There was just increased purchasing. But you can't go by dollars and cents because of inflation. But the market is simply nowhere near what it was. Nowhere near.
Yeah, I thought it was the animal rights movement. But
Oh, no, it started before that. It started before that. And then the animal rights movement just added on to it until it became, it still is in some cases, in some places, pretty dangerous to go walking on the street wearing a fur coat, unless you want to have some letter hand spray or something on it. Okay?
How did it go, Mark? Great, he's terrific.